Welcome back to Close Corner, episode 4. Today, we are talking about the future of journalism, not only here in Hamilton, but across the country. And so, we do have a group of Hamilton journalists in our midst. We do have Kevin Werner joining us. We do have Fallon Hewitt from the Hamilton Spectator. We have Greg Coleman from CHCH, and we have Joey Coleman from the Public Record. Welcome, journalists, to our conversation on this episode of Kojo's Corner. So, as you all know, and if you don't know, well, I'll give you the update. A couple months ago, we heard about the Metroland cuts, and that has an impact here in Hamilton. Um, Kevin Werner tweeted about it, and that means that Kevin will not have a job and will not be covering City Hall and local news. And so we wanted to ask our journalists here, how do we make sure that these cuts don't affect the local coverage that is desperately needed. So we'll start with Kevin, and then we'll follow up with Fallon, Joey, and Greg. Kevin.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here, Kojo. The impact of the cuts on that Metroland and other news organizations have been doing on local news. I think you're seeing it almost immediately, in which part of the cuts were the elimination of the print publication and allowing them to force them to go online. You are getting less news, a local news that is, what they call hyper local. And that means a less engaged community. It is a less informative community about what is going on with their own neighborhood. It is a little bit disconcerting, but it's not just Hamilton; it's across Ontario and across North America, really. And it is, again, as I said, disconcerting.
Fallon, what do you think are some of the images from what you've been covering at the Hamilton Spectator?
Yeah, so with the Spectator, we sort of work in tandem with the community newspapers. In terms of how our coverage, we sort of intertwine coverage. So what we don't cover from our spot at the Spectator, like Kevin and Richard and Mark tend to cover the more hyper local things, so more neighborhood centric stories that we can't always dig down deep into. Like, I think a lot of the work at the Spectator is obviously very good, but some of it is more broad and it's not as centered on those neighborhoods like the Mountain or Stony Creek or Dundas with Craig and yeah, I think a lot of it, that'll be the big loss, is those neighborhood stories, those really hyper local stories, like Kevin was saying. And obviously without those weekly papers going out, there's certain readers that are being left out who maybe can't access the web. Maybe they struggle with getting online. Maybe they just don't have they still have adequate access to the website. And so they're losing out on that chunk of news that would have been, both the communities and pieces from the Spectator. So it affects both of the papers or both of the publications or all of them in their own ways, because people aren't able to access as much content or the information they need in the same way that they so rightfully deserve to.
Yeah, it's
and Joey, when you had go ahead, Greg.
No, I was only going to echo what Fallon had to say. It's awful to see the shrinking of the population of journalists, while increase of the PR agencies and the PR people grow exponentially. Journalists used to outnumber PR people, but now it's not even a contest. And like Fallon said, you lose those hyper local stories, the things that really matter to people when they walk out their door in the morning, wherever they might live. The fewer journalists you have, the less you can cover that sort of thing. And before we got onto the call, we were talking I've worked in print for a long part of my career, and 6 publications that I used to work for are now gone. And all the history is gone. The back issues are gone. Anything that was written, all the history is gone, because I know for some of them that the day they closed, they backed up a dumpster and that went to the landfill. So those bits of history go with it. So the loss in the publications is pretty widespread and it can be felt across the spectrum.
Joey, what was
So we are at a low.
When you heard this?
I wasn't surprised. It was entirely predictable. Unfortunately, it was very clear with the corporate restructuring of the Torstar empire that was what was going to occur. The reality is that Bill C-18 has been a disaster for journalism in this country. Congratulations to the legacy media outlets that lobbied for Bill C-18.
That was us. We were one of those.
Yes. Canadian journalism is going to get worse before it gets better. And we can see the better in the United States. In the United States, we have a lot of local news operations that are popping up in communities of 100,000. You're generally seeing at least 1, sometimes 2 independent news publications starting to pick up and build the new model for journalism. The difference in the United States and Canada is that in the United States, there has been a strong tradition of making sure that government's accountable to the public directly. There hasn't been the same level of gatekeeping, and you haven't had government regulations designed to target independent news, which is something that we are seeing in Canada. C-18, Press Forward, which represents many independent news outlets. Myself, I'm not part of that organization, but I do work with them on a lot of campaigns, asked not to be included in C-18, and the legacy media asked that everybody be included to make sure that they had greater, what they felt would be lobbying power against Google and Facebook. And now what we've seen is Facebook has said, we're going to comply with C-18, and they're complying with C-18, and they're no longer linking the news. And Google is about to start complying, and the result is going to be a devastating decrease in journalism until a future government repeals C-18. And I'll specifically cite Village Media, which has been a great example of rebuilding local news. They've had to freeze their operations completely and freeze filling news deserts because of C-18. And they have to wait until a government decides that it's going to get out of regulating journalism and repeal C-18. And unfortunately for the public, this means less news for the time being until we get the government out of the way.
So, sorry, sorry, Coach. I'm just going to interject.
Okay,
I don't
go.
disagree with I don't disagree with Joey, especially with C-18. But the legacy media, especially in Canada, has shot itself in the foot prior to any type of social media, whether it is the Thompson organization, Black Media, Southern. I mean, when I started working at Braidband in 1999, and from then until now, I think I've gone through about 3 or 4 ownerships. Even before that, Black would just start buying up newspapers and then eviscerate them. Thompson did the same thing, all in the course for profits, not for journalism excellence and not for any type of awards. It was for the bottom line. I mean, Roy Thompson famously said that he owned both broadcasting and newspapers. And the only reason he owned broadcasting was because he had to get a license. It was a way to make money, he said. It was a license to make money. And so There's been famous quotes from Thompson employees. They would only get one pen and one pad of paper, and they would not use it, and they could not get it from the storage room because it was always locked. Did that translate into good journalism? No, it did not. Well, sometimes it did, but it was only a money-making machine. And so now when the social media explosion comes on, the newspapers, the owners, they went crazy trying to adapt badly, by the way, by the U.S. media. I mean, I could remember some Thompson newspapers trying to adapt to the Gannett newspapers, the USA Today. It was a big example to follow. It was, and so you had shorter stories and a lot of color, but the information was just not there. So I don't disagree with Joey and the C18 making a big impact, but the decline started a long time ago.
So we'll get to C18. So what then should as journalists, what do you think is the recipe to move to ensure that we don't lose local coverage?
If anyone figures that out, please let me know.
Any ideas?
I mean, what we're doing at CHCH is we're trying to we try to find what works, and every day we try and line up our shows with what works, what we think works, we think the community is involved in. We've launched newsletters, we've launched podcasts. We're trying to get to the community in as many ways as we can, reach them in text, reach them in video, reach them in their pockets on their phones. This week we started putting the first half hour of Morning Live into a podcast that people can take on the road. Will they listen to it? No idea. Hope so. But we're trying everything to reach people where and when they are.
I hate to be the one who bears bad news, but I expect that the decision of the media conglomerates to lobby for C18 is going to result in the next parliament removing all media supports. The decision to have C11 and to get the CRTC into regulating the internet, which is a fool's errand, the idea that Canada is going to regulate podcasts around the world.
That's not what's happening, Joey. That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening.
That is what's happening. In that we're going to be regulating the platforms.
No, they're going to regulate the platforms because the platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus, they should be contributing to Canadian content. As far as regulating podcasts, that's not going to happen. All they did was ask for people's names and addresses.
Okay. The point being is that, and I'll quickly say, Netflix is spending a lot of money in Canada. We see it all the time in Hamilton. The idea that Netflix is somehow leeching is, to me, a fallacy. But I want to turn to where, unfortunately,
if they're not employing Canadian writers, directors, and actors, and only employing carpenters and plumbers, I would say yes, they are leeching.
I will say that, and I'm going to be very vocally opposed to this when it comes, but I expect that a lot of the funds that run through the CRTC and the CRTC itself is going to have its wings significantly clipped by a future Conservative government. And that will actually be devastating for the independents, which I look at CHEC, which is the independent, used to be sister station of CHCH back in the WIC days, and CHCH. They're doing great work with the funding that they're receiving through the CRTC to provide local news. And I think that is unfortunately going to be the challenge, is that I think we're going to keep losing more until we start rebuilding. And rebuilding is a slow process. It takes 5 years for an independent local news outlet to reach sustainability, and that's in good conditions. I don't think Canada has those good conditions because we've allowed our governments to become very secretive. We've created freedom of information structures that required money, which was great in the 90s when journalists could afford to pay for freedom of information requests. But now we're at a point where there's so many barriers, and we also have lost what I thought was hopeful, which was, back in the aughts, we had amazing local blogs that were launching across the country. And I don't blame people for discontinuing their blogs during the teens, because it's a tough slog to provide local news.
How do you get the public, though, to care about freedom of information, and how horribly, horribly difficult it is for us as journalists to get information out of public organizations? That's the thing. Like, we need pressure from the public to make politicians care, and I don't know how to do that.
I'll turn to Great Britain. And in Great Britain, their freedom of information system was designed to be very accessible to the public. There's a group called My Society, which runs an amazing portal to assist people in filing of freedom of information. People saw freedom of information as their right as the public to access. And unfortunately, because we had set up a system in the 80s and 90s that was not accessible to the public never has had the opportunity to really use freedom of information and see it as their own thing. Same with open data. Unfortunately, we have very little open data in Hamilton. And often I've encountered this where I've been in those meetings where the discussion about data is, well, if you give it to the journalists, we'll help the public understand it. And what ends up occurring is that data gets removed. And I turn to the police traffic portal. There was a period of time where the media outlets received in real time police traffic calls, but that was behind a wall that journalists had to log into. Eventually, it no longer was updated. We wrote stories complaining about it, but the public never saw it as something that they had. Whereas, for example, if fire dispatch, which we're very fortunate that Nick Dixon and Mike Krikopoulos agreed to make it public, and that Nick Dixon pushed hard at the table 10 years ago to make that public. If HVD incidents is shut down because Twitter fails, the city is going to have to put dispatch data on its website because the public accesses it right now and expects to get it. And that's where we need to be pushing for more direct interaction for the public, which benefits journalists as well.
So like, lots going on, legislation and what the public needs, and FOI, access to information. So all of that. But we have I would say one journalist here probably out of a job in December. We have journalist students that are currently in school right now and have to find jobs. So are there creative ways to still do the journalism outside of depending on Metroland and other media operations? Fallon.
Oh, I think there is. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
geez.
We'll start with Fallon and Kevin.
See, like, I only graduated.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead. No, go
So,
ahead.
like, I only graduated, like, in perspective, like 5 years ago. And, I remember graduating from journalism school. And when I was in school, before we jumped on the show, we were talking about some of the papers that were lost in 2017. Like, I was a student when the big swap and chop situation happened, and that was really devastating. But in terms of creativity, I know a lot of, like, I'm not necessarily in this stream of content creation and sharing, but I know a lot of people use, like, platforms like TikTok, because TikTok still, like, allows news, which I didn't realize it was the only one that is still kind of actively allowing you to have videos. Like, I see CH videos all the time on TikTok. And
YouTube Shorts is big too.
Yeah, there are other ways, but I think the problem with some of those platforms is the profitability and what you can actually, like, what's sustainable for people. Like, you can make TikToks all you want, but if that's not going to be something that I know, like, and obviously I'm a huge advocate for sharing information, but I would never expect someone to just share information and do all of that work for free. I would never want anyone to do that, because that's a huge burden and a huge thing for people. Like, working in journalism it's a demanding job, and but it has to be sustainable. So I do see, like, TikTok and content creation, like those ways of reaching people, that's an innovation that's, come up in more recent years. And then obviously there is Substack, which we talked about a bit before we got on here. But again, I don't know what the profitability and like the sustainability of running a Substack is, because again, outside of that, and I don't know too many people who personally use it, but yeah, that like, I wish I had more to add on that, but yeah.
It's not easy. It's a tough, like I was an entrepreneur for a long time in journalism, and it's a tough slog. It's a lot. It takes a lot to build. You got to build trust. It takes a lot of time. You have to start to know accounting and billing and GST and HST. It's, and Fallon, you mentioned TikTok. They're not currently monetizing their platform outside of the States. You can't really make any money unless you have a deal with your own deal and hold up a product in your video.
Yeah, like there's no creator fund here, so it's very hard. Like if you're in the States and you're a TikTok creator that shares news, the door is like wide open for you. Like you
actually,
can,
I believe TikTok has an Indigenous creator fund. Sorry to interrupt. I think they have
I didn't
that
know
in
that.
Canada.
So yeah, and like that's amazing. And like I wish we had a creator fund here in Canada, because I know a lot of people do benefit from it in the United States. And there's so many different creators there that, they've found a way to make things work.
What I find though in this time is that
Kevin
being a diverse,
and Joey?
In the diverse newspaper industry or news industry is that it's the best of times and also the worst of times. The best of times, there's so much opportunity to be yourself, to create content. There's also opportunity for organizations, as they have in the States, in which small organizations can create their own media, either newspapers or broadcasting. The worst of times is those same organizations could and can create information that is untruthful, possibly far right, far left, whatever the case may be, that pushes their own agenda. And so it becomes a matter of trust. Who do you trust out in that diverse Wild West?
There are places that you can go to that'll help you. Like Village Media has their own franchise thing that they sell, where if you pick a town that you wanted to go into, let's say Chatham, Fallon, because you said you were near there. If you wanted to drop a Chatham outlet in there, you could buy that off of Village Media and drop something in there. And there's another company out west called IndieGraph. They started life as a local newspaper or a local website, I forget which. And they're doing the same thing. They're helping different creators all around the country come to market, and they do ad share revenue and things like that. There's a tiny publication called The Wren, WREN, based in Kamloops. Very esoteric, unusual publication, but they're using IndieGraph to make a business out of it. So there's really a lot going on in the local space if you look beyond legacy media. Even us, we've launched the Brant Beacon 2 years ago. It's a website, grassroots website dedicated to Brantford, Brant County, and Six Nations. So we're trying to fill in some spaces as well and experiment in the space.
Joey?
Well, as the first journalist to use crowdfunding for local journalism in Canada, I'm familiar with this space. I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? Reputation's a challenge. You got to build it, you got to sustain it, and you've got to accept the attacks. That's part of being in local news. Is you are regularly going to be attacked. Tim in Halifax went through it as well. It's just part of the reality. So you have to have a thick skin. I mean, it was much easier back when I was working nationally, and I often wonder, what would have been if I had stayed in national journalism. It was much easier when I got my steady paycheck. I had the lawyer on standby. The idea that violence would happen to me and there was nothing I could do did not exist in national news. That's part of, unfortunately, the reality of, the times we're in. It's a dark time. I think that we will see people building things, and I think that it's going to end up being the good old-fashioned gumshoe journalism. I think one of the mistakes that journalism keeps making is jumping platform to platform to platform to platform instead of owning our own platform. And when you look at the sites that are most successful in the United States, they are most successful because they've stayed on their platform. They use social media to reach out, but they ultimately are grounded where they are, which is their website. And in some ways, when we get past the C18 era here, the fact that social media companies have realized they don't need news. Facebook took news off their platform to comply with the government law, C18. It's not that Facebook said we want to remove news. It's they were given a choice.
Facebook wants to remove news. Sorry to interrupt.
Now they've realized that having removed news, minimal impact on their platform. We're seeing the same with tweets. They're saying they're not going to prioritize news. We're seeing that on other platforms. And so now we're back to what's old is new again. And we're back to about 15 years ago where the website will become the main thing. The newsletter will be the thing. Few podcasts will succeed. Ultimately, it's experimentation. And I am always honest when I get the opportunity. I regularly lecture in journalism classes in my capacity as a Southam Fellow. I often tell the young journalists that, well, they've got a lot of freedom. They also have to realize that we're not going back to the good old days. I mean, some of the travel I got to take at Maclean's, I'll never again experience that.
Yeah, Joey is right. We do have to bring people to our platform, back to our platform, whether it's print, website, or for us, TV, whether you're doing podcasts, doesn't matter what it is. We have to concentrate on getting people back to our platform and forget about the social media giants. Honestly, Facebook can go fly a kite. They are a terrible, terrible company. Just last month, they had let an advertisement go on their website, go on their platform that faked us and faked Pierre Poilievre to try and scam people out of $60,000, according to the ad. So this was Facebook making money off an ad that was looking to rob its own users. And when we complained and said, this is our video, please take it down, they didn't take it down. They said it doesn't violate our community guidelines. And they put a tag on it that said, fact checkers say this video may not be correct. Meanwhile, the owner of the video was telling them it was not correct. It was faked, defaked, and trying to scam people, and they still wouldn't take it off. So honestly, I'm happy not on Facebook and Instagram. Meta is a terrible, terrible company.
I'm going to quickly note that Kevin made a great point
let's stick
about
with this idea of platform. So how some news outlets have the paywall stuff, right? How do you get people to the platform? I think T might be a little bit easier. What platform do you get people there when they are important news and local coverage?
Actually, I want to hear about what Joey has to say, because anytime I hear somebody say I have a great point, then I want to hear it.
I was just briefly going to say that Kevin may recall, I can't remember when the West Hamilton News was shut down. And that was the weekly Brabant paper that served the lower city. And that was shut down well before the internet. So we've had these business decisions being made before. And that's a point that I wanted to make, was that the lower city of Hamilton unfortunately lost its weeklies. I think that was in the 90s, because I remember my first apartment in 99.
Yeah, that was
I
correct.
did not get that. Turning to paywall, I think that other people are better able to answer that, because I do not have a paywall, and I don't believe that they're a viable part of the local business model.
Yeah, I ran a business for years with a paywall, but it was pretty different. It was trade news media. So a lot of those subscriptions, almost all of those subscriptions, I should say, were getting paid by somebody's company. So it was a business expense. So a bit different, but I did launch it back in 2005, and I put a subscription subscription on it. And at the time, I was getting told I was crazy that people wouldn't pay for news, because at the time, people were still thinking, this Facebook. I mean, YouTube was born in 2005 and Facebook in 2004. So my company Cart.ca was launched in 2005. So it was a bit of an outlier, but I knew the information was really deep information that people needed. And I mean, you could look at it as a community as well, because it was just a community built around where people work and what they do for a living. But like I said, it's a bit of an outlier, not a bit of an outlier, quite an outlier, because it's trade media and people were paying for it through their business. But as far as the other paywalls, we don't have one at CHCH, unless we're out there for free, on air, online.
Fallon, you want to jump in? How you get people on the platform and paywall? The Spectator
I was trying
has a
to.
paywall.
The Spectator has a paywall, but not every article is paywalled. But I previously, before I came to the Spectator, I was at Brunswick News, which was owned by the Irvings when I was there. And we had a hard paywall. Like, you could not read the paper online if you didn't have a subscription. And I think, and because the Telegraph Journal was obviously the paper of record, and that was the way it had been for a long time. It had been a hard paywall for many years, like long before other people had jumped on paywalls. So I don't know really how we drew people in. I wasn't really a part of those conversations, and I wasn't there for that long, but it seemed like it was the dependability of the newspaper that really brought people, and the kind of content we were able to create and the kind of journalism we were able to do. We had a decent sized newsroom. We had the most reporters in the province at that point. That's not true anymore, unfortunately, but I think it was just the greater reach really helped bring people in with the paywall. It was relatively low cost, as far as I can remember. I haven't checked what their subscriptions look like now. And then there is another outlet out east that has like a couple of different websites, but they focus mostly on business coverage. And they also have a hard paywall. And they've done really well. They also have websites out west as well, but it's business news. So, the subscribers are probably most likely politicians, policymakers, business owners, people who... And they look at that news specifically. It's very, very narrow. It's very niche, but they've done really well. And I think it's because they just cater to one audience. But when it came to the Telegraph Journal, I think it was just because we were the paper of record, and that happened to work. But it did not work forever, because things did decline. Shortly after I left, things started to sort of hit a wall, I think, with what they were able to do. I think they kind of hit like a precipice, and then that was what they hit, and then they couldn't go any further with picking up subscriptions. I think they'd gone as far as they could, because you're limited out there too with population and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you just really have to find your niche, and hope
Kevin?
people will pay for it. The last time I was in Indigo, I saw, which is a while ago, but I saw 3 magazines just for knives. So somebody's making money at that for people who like knives. You have to find your niche and hope people pay for it.
I think Fallon touched on something. Yes, find your niche. So you look at the New York Times. They find that they are probably one of the most successful ones at the paywall, but they have distinctive content. I like it. Same with the Wall Street Journal. But those are large organizations that have a specific audience, and they are successful at getting those subscribers. But the real tough one is, how do you convince an audience that has been programmed to access news for free, relatively free? And that's, try and convince them to pay for news. I mean, when I went to the University of Windsor, I picked up the, and this is back in the 80s, Detroit Free Press was 15 cents. And the Detroit News was 25 cents. I mean, it was unbelievable. Now, you know, a paper, the Toronto Star, is $4.50 a daily. So news as a commodity is something that the public still hasn't really latched onto too much. You know, you pick up a magazine for X number of dollars, and that's fine. Once a month, that's fine. That's what you want, but it's a specific tailored to a specific audience.
I was going to add on,
So,
like, magazines.
Can I ask this question?
Also,
Maybe. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I had this conversation the other day and I hadn't thought about it in a long
Go ahead,
time. Is
Fallon.
that when you buy a magazine, it's not like I don't know, they have like such a longer shelf life. So I feel like people will pick up magazines and they hold on to them for a longer time. Like the storytelling is so different that they remain, I don't know if I want to say more relevant, but they latch on to people for a longer time. I think people have more of an attention span for that kind of storytelling, or they're able to sink their teeth deeper into it than like the rotating content that the never-ending rotating content that comes from daily newspapers. But
but it's a tangible thing too. I think people are more apt to pay for something they can hold in their hand, you know. And even though the newspaper was basically a delivery vehicle for the information, you're really paying for the information. There's something about holding something in your hand that, you know, that really sort of adds a little extra oomph to it, a little extra punch, a little extra value. I don't know.
You know, and I agree, because, you know, there's that photograph of the kids in the sports holding up an award, or mom and dad at you know, the pumpkin fest type of thing. You know, they cut it out and put it on the fridge. That doesn't happen anymore, doesn't happen very often.
Well, that used to be a side business for newspapers too. You would print off the pictures that the photographers would take, you know, so that people could frame them and all the rest of it. Now they just print them off on their own and put them on their fridge.
Right.
Too bad we couldn't charge a penny of that every time that happened.
So then, with all of this insight around platforms and creating niches and coming up with different models, you know, physical versus digital, you know, what advice would you give to young journalists today? And maybe how do we ensure that residents still have access to news and local coverage?
Well, I'll start off
Anyone
because I
can
get that
start.
question when I left. I'll start because I get that question when I give guest talks, and my answer to journalism schools, and for reasons that I don't understand, journalism schools invite me back, is go get a expertise in something other than journalism, and then return to journalism with that, especially for those that are doing journalism straight out of high school. The second is that you got to pick your lane and pick it early, and then make sure that you have the expertise. That's really, you know, the thing that I say. And I came into journalism not out of journalism. I never expected to be a journalist. Maclean's called me out of the blue and offered me a job when they decided that they didn't want to compete with my blogging anymore, because I had a good amount of knowledge in my area of expertise. I go back to, you know, when you think about the golden age of news, when trust was high, when people really waited with bated breath for the paper, there was a saying that people came to journalism honestly. And I've been having a lot of fun going through the archives of the Southam Fellowship, you know, learning about journalists from the 60s and 70s. And they generally did something else and ended up one day deciding they want to be a journalist, applied in a newsroom, got a job, and went out there and muckraked. And it gets to a wider societal challenge that we face as a society. which is, we've overeducated ourselves for certain positions, and we've given up the value of on-the-job training. And so, one of the challenges is that a person, say they're in high school, they want to be a journalist. The reality is that they need to pay their way into the guild by going through journalism school, because so few outlets now hire outside of the journalism school pipeline. Somebody that gets hired outside of that pipeline, like me, has to prove themselves outside. And again, getting back to my case, I honestly never expected to be a journalist. 3 days before Maclean's hired me, somebody offered me a column position at another publication. I was like, I don't plan to be a journalist. And then when Maclean's offered me a job, I took it.
Well, I didn't go to journalism school, so I mean, but it's not like I didn't I didn't practice journalism. I worked at my school paper for 3 years and then got a job in journalism after that. But I think Joey's right. It does help to have other experiences, whether it's your summer job or things you do on the side, hobbies, whatever it is. That's the kind of stuff that can inform your journalism. If you have other perspectives beyond just what's in the newsroom or beyond just what's been in front of your face for your whole life.
So I was on track to become looking to become an American history professor until I enrolled in the journalism program at Western, because I didn't want, because it was during a tough economic time during the mid '80s, and I wanted a job, so that's why I went into Western, and it was a time of where you could do what you want within reason, but also, as Joey said, now they wanted some background, lived experience, as well as that degree as well, which really did help. But it's still a tough time to get into, because it was the changes that were happening within the reporting and media companies at the time.
I'll jump in as like a relatively young journalist. For me, so I went to journalism school. Journalism was what I wanted to do, like in high school. So I went to college, and I have a degree from Humber College from a journalism program that's sadly been paused due to a lack of enrollment this year. I don't know if the program will come back. But for me, like a huge thing that really benefited me was doing as much freelancing as I could during school. Like I had a number of assignments that I was able to pitch to outlets and have them published. And that really helped, because it gave me that, I don't know, a little bit of a jump once I graduated, because I had no idea what I was going to do. I was entering a market that I thought I had no way of competing in. But it ended up helping me get my first paid job, which was at Post Media as a summer intern for 2 months. And then I went from there. But it was a lot of networking and just trying to put myself out there as much as I could in the capacity that I had as a student, and finding things that I was passionate about, writing about them, and then, pushing myself to put myself out there and engage, not letting the imposter syndrome get me, but just pushing forward really worked. And having good mentors. I don't know if that answers the question, but I had some really good mentors that gave me really great advice and helped me and pushed me and helped me get to where I was. I don't know if that answers the question, but
the advice. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say the advice I give to young journalists is to write. Because even in TV, it starts with the writing. Every good story starts with the writing. So if you have something you're interested, even if you're not getting paid for it, I volunteered. I got paid for a summer's work with the Sioux this week, providing them a game of the week. They paid me with a case of beer at the end of the summer. But it was good practice. It was good practice for writing, because I was going to be sports editor at my student paper. So just write as much as you can and hone that craft, because that's where all of this begins.
One of the things I've unfortunately have seen is that over my career is that a lot of good people even with a journalism degree, but a lot of them did not have a journalism degree, but who had worked in media, who are a lot better than I am, are not working in media companies because of how much the media companies, the decision making, just beats them down. And they can see, even though they have good and are adventurous and they have innovative ideas, they only can see sometimes a limited opportunity, and they go elsewhere. And how I'm still here is beyond me. But it just shows that you need a lot of determination, a lot of initiative, and also some help as well from other people.
Yeah, you have to seek out those mentors and seek out those people who are willing to help and see journalism as a public good and who are willing and want to help you.
And forego that high pay.
So we have about 14 minutes. we have about 40 minutes. So what I wanted us to do for the last 40 or so is, I all of you read a lot, and as you know, democracies, the globe are at risk or are teetering. So, what is the connection between journalism, democracy, and I know Joey and Greg mentioned Bill C-18 and 11. We didn't get enough to go into it, but where do you see all of these things intersecting, and how can residents get coverage or be involved? Either way, right? I think it's important to hear from you. So, what are the intersections between democracy, the status of journalism right now, the current legislation that is going to impact the journalism, and people are taking in the journalism, and people also looking for coverage and news? We'll start with Joey, and Greg, Fallon, and Kevin.
So my readership is higher than it's ever been. I'm very happy with that. I, am constantly working to improve myself, as we all are. And I think, we are at its point where it does feel very dark. Voter turnout is decreasing. But I also think that we're going to eventually hit bottom and start getting back up. And I don't know how much further bottom will be. I note that yesterday was the biannual release from Statistics Canada of their newspaper stats. And, to think Kevin would recall this back in, I don't know if Brabant did it, but Southam did it, the turkeys at Christmas, because there was lots of money. The profit margin in newspapers is now down to 2.5%. That's not including the financialization, like Post Media is making a lot of money. That's a whole other discussion. Public trust in journalism is declining. I think it's going to continue to decline. And I think that the reality is that those of us who are in the field need to work each day to try to do our best to be mindful of how fragile that trust is. And I mean fragile in the sense that, like, right now when we ask questions, we need to be deciding what are the questions we ask, because people are watching. And I hear it from people. They're like, that recent Apple moment where Pierre Poilievre was able to take viral and just score points against the journalist was because the journalist did not come with good open questions, which enabled the politician to turn on them. And that's a thing that's changed as well, is that journalists are now being dragged into the politics. And so I'll just quickly say, for example, myself, one of the things I do every election is I go out and interview each and every candidate. But I also think about the questions, and I formulate the questions to try to get a more insightful answer than a talking point. So take, for example, the mayoral interviews. Mayor is our representative to other levels of government. There's a question there. But the way that I phrased the question was to put them in a scenario that wasn't left or right, which was LaSalle Park. What are you going to do about the future of LaSalle Park? Because we own it, Burlington wants to buy it. And it's framing questions like that to try to get past the talking points that will help rebuild public trust. And that's really tough. I could do that because I wasn't in a scrum. It wasn't day-to-day news. I had time to step back. I could tell you, I've gone back to my audio of scrums, and there's a lot of questions I want to take back. So I do not want to leave the listeners with any impression that I am great at this. That's why I need to improve.
Yeah, every time I hear somebody open with a question to a politician, talk about, my heart just sinks because that's not a question. But what I would say, I just reiterate something I wrote a couple of weeks ago, and I put on the ch.com website, was that, we need your help. And I'm speaking to the citizens of the community. We need your help. Get off social media, come and seek out real sources of news. What your Uncle Bob is telling you on Facebook is probably not real. And if it is real, it's probably partially wrong, at least partially wrong. So, we hear people all the time complaining about the lack of journalism and the lack of journalists and the shrinking number of journalists. Well, some of this has to fall on the feet of the citizens themselves to look for real sources of news. Check out the places that you are getting your news from. See what their standards and practices are. We have that published on our website now. It tells you exactly what our standards and practices are. I can tell you there's 80 people that work for us that are working their hardest to put out facts and truth every day. And you have to dig. If you're if you're a citizen out there listening, I don't know who's out there listening, but we need your help to pay attention to people worth paying attention to.
Yeah, for me, I would say just like, for me, I think just being involved and connecting in the community and like building relationships like as much as possible is a huge thing for journalists. It's just like, you can be a journalist and you have your outside looking in, but I think it's really important to be involved and to make yourself known and to show that you're dedicated to the community outside of writing about it. I think that's been hugely positive for me. I've been able to build so many different relationships just by, going out and doing things and being visible and talking to people. Like, it's like, I cover business a lot. So I'll go to the farmer's market. I've never seen you there, Joey. So I know I always look for you, but you're never there. What the heck?
You got to go where the ice cream is, I'm told.
No, I always I'm pretty sure Joey's always by they make the spinach bagels, but the name of the business is escaping me, and the cookies and everything. But just like going and talking to people, like I will walk into a business and just be like, hey, like, how's it going? Like, I just always try to engage and then try to be around. And I think that is hugely helpful when it comes to like elevating and making sure people know who we are and putting a face behind the name on like a byline. I think it's huge, and it helps people. It kind of draws people in. I think it's helped bring people to the Spectator, for example. Like, I don't know, I've had people tell me, I subscribe to the Spectator because, of this story or that story. And like, I have like a, back and forth sort of chatter with them. And it's been really hugely helpful just being involved in the community beyond like writing about some of the worst moments of the city's history and the best moments, of course. But yeah.
My colleagues are absolutely right. I agree with them. One thing I would emphasize is that, and Greg touched on, is it's trust. These days, you need to have a trust in the organization, trust in the person who's you're interviewing or that you're being interviewed by, and making sure that what you produce is a trustworthy product. One of the opportunities I find, despite my situation, but one of the great opportunities right now is that in the past, newspapers and broadcast media were dominated by older white men. Now, this is an opportunity for all types of diverse individuals, indigenous. Anybody can get involved as a group or individually and make their voice known. whether through blogs or talking to us or getting their stories out. And I think we're starting to do that. And we've seen that happen over the years with the Indigenous and Black and LGBTQ communities. But there needs to be more inclusiveness in that regard.
Thank you. So thank you very much for spending Friday evening with us. Again, we were talking about the future of journalism. We have some local journalists here. We had Greg O'Brien from CHCH, Joey Coleman from the Public Record, Fallon Hewitt from the Hamilton Spectator, and Kevin Werner for Community News. Kevin has been doing local coverage here forever, and
It seems like it anyway.
He's no longer, yeah, he's no longer going to be doing that come December. So we wish him all the best, and maybe Kevin might start his own publication, and to keep covering what's going on at City Hall and in all the different neighborhoods, and to all the journalists that are also not going to continue with the community for your coverage, and we hope that you will continue to cover the important news that happens in all the neighborhoods and all the areas of Hamilton. So Kevin, just want to say thank you for your coverage. We wish you the best in your future endeavors, and to everybody watching, thank you for tuning in. Our next episode is going to be in December. We are most likely going to continue with the topic of journalism. So stay tuned for our next. For now, it is I continue being engaged in your community, be kind neighbors, and be patient and loving people, whatever you do. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Fallon. Thank you, Kevin. Good night and have a great week.
Thanks, Kojo. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.